Well, hello and welcome. It's wonderful to be here again with you with another podcast. It's been a while. The last podcast that I did with Alondra Markman actually went viral. And at the same time, even though I want to thank you for your generous contributions, especially, those many small contributions which make a huge difference. Interestingly, that was the podcast that received the least contributions. So, one thing about going viral is that apparently it is less inspiring for giving. So, it took a while before I was able to come back. I want to thank some extremely generous donors that have really brought me here. I am at the moment in Utah, in a small artist town called Helper, amidst the beautiful, magical mountains. We're at elevation of over 5,000 feet. I am interviewing Raine today. Asia and I go back quite a while. We have a very good friend in common. And so that friend had already, who's also a survivor, that survivor had already put us in contact years back. And we've been in more closer contact in these last years, and then especially in these last months. So Asia Raine is a survivor also, particularly of the Mormon church. And I'm just very happy to welcome you, Asia.
Thank you. I am so delighted that you're here today, and thank you for reaching out. I'm so just happy to have a conversation with you. So thank you.
It's my great pleasure and honor.
Yeah, I feel honored as well.
So, yes, Asia, just jumping right in. Would you be willing to kind of tell us a little bit like what your experience was?
Absolutely. My experience began at birth, multi-generational family, connection to the network, to SRA, and it had a very heavy slant into religion. So directly with the Mormon Church, and the Mormon Church is also known as the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. So those two titles are interchangeable. And that was the religion that I was born into. The family that I was born into was would utilize the satanic ritual patternings and trainings and conditionings in family experiences. So at home, family reunions, just it was common and typical, but I wouldn't have known that it was unusual.
So, can you give an example of that?
Yes, I can. There would be just even a punishment reward system, because I was trained that there was always anything that would feel maybe genuine as far as kindness. That one always gets me. Love is one thing. I don't even know if I could honestly trust what real love was, although I did feel what I knew to be love. It was always the kindness that got to me, that I was suspicious about. And what I'm referring to is just there would be a very real part of me that fell into the kindness of another person or of my father or my grandmother or whatever, because I wanted it. I wanted to trust it. And there are definitely times that it was trustworthy and that there wasn't a punishment or a twist to it on the other side. And so,
But you're saying that in your training,
in my training, there was definite training, honestly, that would begin even with like touch, like soft touch that would turn into pain. So it would start out
in the
kind
family, you mean?
in the family.
Okay, so you said kindness versus punishment, right?
Punishment interpreted as pain or as something wrong. I did something wrong, confusion. Yeah.
And how would it relate to kindness exactly? Like there's the front,
The
which is the
front, yeah. So a kindness, maybe even verbally, or an invitation, come over here and help me, or something like that. Even I remember my dad would make actions of wanting to engage in play and fun, and it would turn into pain. So
So it
tickling
would be painful for you.
always. Yeah, it was a very, always is pretty, like, it would be painful for me often, I guess I
So
could
you'd
say.
engage in tickling, which is the fun part and the front, and
Mhm.
even though tickling
Even
it's
though-
tricky because it's actually is actually often used as a way this for incest can be sometimes, unwanted tickling is one of the
Correct.
things that are,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, and leading up to that, it would feel, especially as a child, it would feel playful and
Okay,
game-like.
okay. And then when you say it turns into, so the same tickling session, you could say,
Sure.
then becomes painful for you?
Becomes painful through intensity, pressure. I would change in my reception to it, like it became too much and I would kind of like, no, and
So you would say
no, I
no,
would say no,
and
and
then
it
you
would,
wouldn't stop.
he would not stop. And so it would even become more painful and it would hurt. And I remember there would be places on my body that just even ribs or some place that would really be, or my feet that would be targeted. And then later, as I was getting my memories, those were also torture points. So it was a training to trigger those points on my body so my body would remember both.
So your father had this very kind front, which, by the way, any Mormons I've ever met, always just the kindest people ever. Yeah, that's kind of the word that stands out for. So you have this very kind family, and you have a very kind father, and then there's this tickling session, and you now understand that he was actually already specifically that this was not just play that went too far.
Correct.
It was actually targeted.
That was a common theme. Grabbing me as I'm running by and kind of laughing, but then maybe throwing me over his knee and pinching my bottom a lot, and it would hurt. And
For a joke?
it was a joke, right? So there was pinching, a lot of pinching that would happen. And then there were nights that this would include my siblings and I, where he would pretend to be a monster. He would hide, so it was a house hide and seek, and be like, like he'd be on all fours or whatever, or we would, however, the memory that I would have of these times would start out kind of fun. And then for me personally, the crossover of terror, ooh, I can feel that right now too.
Yeah.
The crossover of terror would be there because of the surprise because of the kind of subconscious desire to not be found. Like, it's part of the game and someone's going to be found. It's just like hide and seek outside with friends or whatever, but this had a different aspect to it that I didn't know was unusual, and perhaps it wasn't unusual. I don't know, but for me there was a very real aspect of being discovered, and if I was the one that was discovered first, again, more pinching, more tickling, there's a lot of pressure, and it's like you really couldn't push it away because he would quit fast enough to grab another child and do the same thing, so it was like a group.
So it seemed like because everybody was subjected to it, it seemed like it was just something your father did.
Correct.
Okay.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, got it. So there's the kindness at the front and everyone's very smiley.
Oh yeah, oh yeah, yeah. So the appearances were, I could say that I didn't think we looked unusual. I don't think that we presented ourselves as any, like a family that would be in question of anything, especially the neighborhood, our involvement in our congregation, our church family. Like there was nothing that.
So
I
you
would
went
say
to church.
Went to church weekly. Back in the when I was younger, the church has changed its format of how often church attendance was. So when I was younger, we would go to church on Sunday and they had it split. So we'd go to church in the morning, you'd go home and have a meal, and then you'd come back to church in the afternoon or evening. And then during the week after elementary school, we would walk to the church and have the children's congregational weekly meeting. If you were a youth age at 12 years old or older until about 18, they would have their nights, their after school nights that all of the youth would gather. Back then it was called Mutual. It's just what they called it, MIA. And then for the adults, they also had their separate meetings. So the training and the availability, the attendance was spread out over the week fairly often. So, I mean, 2 or 3 times a week we were involved in.
Gotcha. So I'm assuming that also of all the people that are attending, the children that are attending, the adults that are attending, that obviously your family was a transgenerational SRA family in the Mormon church. But of the other members, we can assume that many of them were not.
I would assume that, yes.
So there was a perfect cover that these are actual smiley people and very kind people and that are very sincere about following, but then also religious. But then for you, there was this, when you said because of the religion and the punishment, was it connected to the religion? The idea of the
Yes.
punishments?
Absolutely. And I would also say we were not the only family in that ward or in that congregation that had generational
Okay,
ritual abuse.
gotcha.
So there was a mix. There were people that I would recognize that would also be in attendance to these other events connected to the church. One of the things in reference in the connection would be that because religion or that religion has its own ceremonies, like so just going to church and singing particular songs, taking the sacrament, like this is where we would have, and like Catholic Church, it's called Eucharist, we would have bread and water. That's how the Mormons would do it. And so that was also something that would be a ceremonial reference in the darker ceremonies. So anything that was done as a congregation in the group consciously that good people and also members of this organization all participated in, they would also take these surface good, well-intended religious practices, and then they would take them into the darker practices but give them different meanings.
Okay.
So
basically the reversal,
correct.
which is the satanic.
Correct.
Okay, so
Correct.
and then it's mocking. It's about really mocking those very things that everyone is celebrating and mocking Christ and mocking everything. Okay. Okay, and so I know from listening to other interviews and also from speaking with you that you were being trained to be part of the leadership. And so can you talk about that, how you were picked, if you know?
Sure, I do
And
know how I was picked. Yeah.
Okay.
The choosing comes through a screening. The church owns a lot of businesses in Utah, and back in the 70s, early 70s, when I was 5 years old, they own a television station, and there was a program that ran. In this case, for me and for some other children, being picked for those 2 weeks meant that we were being filmed and recorded in our interaction and in our play.
And screened.
And screened. And so then that screening would happen.
So these are children, I'm sorry, just
No,
to
no, you're
interrupt,
fine.
just clarifying for everyone that these children were all potential candidates
Correct.
that were on that program. Then,
Correct.
from these families.
Yes. I'm not sure that all children were from generational
Gotcha.
families. I'm not sure that they weren't. I don't know.
Okay.
I know that because I was part of that group and picked to be on the filming, on the screening, a part of the program, interacting the way I was, and then that screening went up to whoever was, whoever was actually in the screening. In my case, it was the leadership of the Mormon Church. So the high level leadership would be, if you're Mormon, you understand that there's 15 men that run the church. And so I was chosen by one of those 15. And that's when I was about 5 years old. So that's when I was more formally brought in. I did have a ceremony that I remember that did involve higher levels of people, probably not the highest, where I was 3 years old. And there was some training that was being done at 3 years old. And also symbolic, I was kind of the symbolic innocence in a particular ceremony. And
You could say they already had their eye on you.
well, I would say so. I mean, I'm the oldest in my family. I'm the oldest of 2 oldest children. There's some symbolism that comes in just even
From your
with
birth.
that. From my birth,
Gotcha.
correct. So oldest granddaughter. There's a lot of things that can add up in that symbolism.
Absolutely.
So,
Firstborn.
yeah. So at 5 formally is when I was introduced to the church administration building and to that higher level access.
Just 5 years old.
Absolutely. And then from there, I would be taken to utilized in a lot of different ways, taken to formal ceremonies, individual ceremonies. And the request of when to deliver me would come through a phone call, come to my dad, however messages were delivered to him.
Okay. So there was you and perhaps some other children were being prepared to have a role in the leadership, not like those men, because you had to be a man for that, but
Correct.
for women. So once, for me in the network, there was a decision made of what I was going to be for the network, and this role was created. So for me, there was a very formal mind control training done. And then there were also ceremonies, but the ceremonies were more to the side, and they were rituals that were meant to indoctrinate me deeper into the cults. So from you, I haven't heard you speak about this sort of like, okay, you go to MK Ultra, so I just want to hear a little bit, from what I've heard from you, it seems like there's a lot of training that has gone through the family, and not so much like you were taken someplace and then I just want to just check with you.
Oh, no, I'm actually, thank you for asking that. The training that you're talking about did happen for me and with me specifically. What I know is I was being trained to be part of a pool of women, eventually women, but the training was to create an availability for them to choose from. So just because I received that training, I was being put into, I would have a file, they keep files of who and what, and they would be tracking me. But the way I would call it is I was put into a pool of women that could be chosen. Girls that would eventually grow up in the church to be chosen from as a leader. And so whatever that leadership is, whether it would be through a presidency of an auxiliary group or a supportive role, maybe even on a more local level, a lot of leadership callings. And that kind of training made it so that availability, I would be available for that. And it would be not seen as training, it would be seen as direct revelation from God if I received a phone call or, to have that interview, to get that calling to then attend these privileged meetings.
So it was a meeting.
Meetings, it would be more than meetings. It's in the church, it's a calling. So you're given a title and you're given a role. And so like the presidency of the church, the way their structure is, they have also what they call auxiliary for the women, a similar structure with a president and 2 counselors or 2 vice presidents. So and then they have supporting auxiliary people. So any one of those women in that structure, you could pull from this pool, because they know that they're mind controlled and they're set up and could be easily directed into delivering whatever messages they were wanting the women to deliver.
So can I ask you then how the mind control was all within the Mormon church?
For my experience, yes. Yeah, I had government training. Yes, they use those techniques.
So they use the same MK Ultra techniques.
Correct.
Basically on you.
Yes.
Did they also have facilities?
Yes.
So some of the things that I underwent in this facility where I was mind control trained at 9 was I was electrocuted quite a bit.
Oh man. Yeah, that happened often. Cattle prods, they would have things that, like, what are they, those little suction cups or something like that?
Yeah.
Often. That was often.
So can you, so for me, for example, the electrocution was a lot around my head, but then it was paired with people screaming at me that I'm a whore, for example, for the sexual training. So do you remember, and I don't want to pry, but when you say cattle prod, so again, it's like, it seems less formal somehow. The electrodes seems more formal, but you went to a facility, and even though it was run by Mormons, it had the same kind of equipment.
Yes.
Than the government would.
Yes.
And this equipment was used specifically to split your consciousness, to traumatize you and create altars.
Yes. It would even be used in one circumstance, the electrodes that would be on my body. I had some on my back. Well, my body would be covered with them, head, everywhere.
Your body was covered with electrodes that were connected to somebody having a switch.
Often. Yes. Often. And it would be more than a switch. It was more like a dial or a switch. And in this one circumstance that I'm remembering, the training was very specific to Mormon scripture, or Mormon, this is where church kind of comes over into it, where I was being taught what the Holy Spirit feels like. And so in Mormon training...
What the Holy Spirit feels like?
Yes.
Like an electrocution?
Yes, it would feel like a tingling up your spine or a tingling down your spine, which would be actually replicated with electrodes.
So it wasn't painful?
Not in that circumstance. No, it was a tingling. So they had a low level.
So you were being attached to the electrodes, and then they dial it up, and you feel a tingling down your spine, and then they say that's what the Holy Spirit feels like.
Correct. And then, based on that baseline, then I was presented with choices. Is this what we're going to choose? Is this correct? Are you listening to these instructions or not? And that's when they could amp it for pain, or they could give me the low level tingling. So if I was making choices or responding to their instructions in the way they wanted me to respond for them, that's when I was being taught and trained that this would be the Spirit. This is what the Spirit feels like. And if it was incorrect, I would be...
So all the right experiences, according to their manipulation, that was spirit.
Correct. And that actually played over into my lifetime as an adult.
It's so insane.
Well, if you give the wrong answer, and so this is again, it overlaps into kindness, because if somebody is being kind to me and it's a genuine one, and I honestly can feel it's genuine, there's a part of me that is just so moved and touched
You want to do anything.
by that show of kindness. Exactly. And when it's not, when there's a question, I can be cynical about it, there's always something behind it. Like I'm wondering, it's like, what's behind, why are you being nice to me? What else do you want? Where is this going to go? And so trust is a navigational like labyrinth.
Sure.
On the cattle prod part, I want to actually, also add that was an instrument that was used for remember the soft touch and then the pain, because they can run the wand or whatever it is along your body without turning it on, so it can feel soft, and then there can be pressure applied, and then they could turn it on. So it's still it creates a mistrust within,
Yeah.
not just of the people outside of you, but like you don't even know if you can trust your body. Somebody gentle touch, right? It's like, where's this going? And it might not be conscious, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it's translating that way within your body,
Well,
or
trusting your own
emotions.
body. But okay. Now, when you mention that you can't trust your own body, like I was trained as a sex slave, you were too.
Yes.
So even though you were being prepared for a leadership role, we can never forget the sex training, which seems to be part and parcel of every satanic group, everybody that's engaged with mind control. There's training for sex slavery.
Right.
And you as well.
Absolutely. Yeah, that was common. That was often part of being trained to go into that pool of leadership, included a lot of sex training. And the way
was your family incestuous first?
Yes.
So your father had this kind front, but he was also touching you sexually.
Absolutely. And there was training and preparation basically from infancy for that.
If I understand it right, for me also anyway, the sexual abuse was being given or sold as a child, but then also in rituals or around rituals, a lot of that.
I had a similar experience. It's very much the same pattern.
I mean, I'm sorry to ask, but is there something that you are thinking about that you might?
As an infant?
No, not as an infant necessarily, because you understand that you were being prepared for this, and that as a 3-year-old girl, you were already, there was already, a ritual where you were chosen in a way.
Yeah, for my innocence.
For the innocence.
It was very unstabilizing, meaning the way that my body was remembering this particular experience was feeling off balance, and what was being done, and it was for the summer solstice, I do know that.
Okay.
So this was being done at that particular time, and they had what looked like a platter. It was this big round, disc with handles on it. And 2 men were carrying me in, and
You were sitting on it?
I was tied to it, so I was sitting on it. So it was created for this purpose. So I was holding on to the side to stabilize myself, but I was also tied to it, legs and hands. So I really couldn't thrash around. And in addition to that, the drugging, like I was constantly drugged. So, and they're doing this to destabilize the child, to make it so you're able to be even more blown open to it. But then you're not going to fight back as much, right? You're not going to be really in your wits unless they want you to be totally terrorized by it. And that comes in different stages too. So this particular one that I'm remembering had everything to do with dedication of innocence, which was me as a 3-year-old, And then of the members of the group, the women had to make a particular offering that had to do with some white flowers. And the men were also, it was a chanting kind of thing. And I got carried in and placed on some kind of an altar or a pedestal or something. But they had words that were being said. There was against these white flowers, but then they ended up pouring blood on them and then blood on me. And it was this blood offering that I remember as a 3-year-old. I remember feeling sticky. I remember feeling, these, so I was having these physical sensations.
Blood feels sticky.
It does. And then not really, and it was also things that I remember tuning into, like when it was time for me to be lifted off of that, felt really odd to have things, like that blood dripping off of me, like some of the things that stayed with me.
Where it came from, the blood.
In that case, it was a pitcher full of blood. And I don't remember being present for where
it was collected.
Where it was collected. Yeah, mine was the innocence of the after. That's outside of infancy that I remember being more formalized, and then things got very formal more often at 4 and then 5, especially after being chosen to go up into the leadership areas, and that became more common.
And what I understand is that your father, what you shared yesterday was your father's always involved, and even things that happened, sometimes trades, deals, but still always connected also to your role and your training.
Correct. There was specific training that they did with the children. And I'm recalling one that I think it was mainly girls that was in this, and their fathers came with them. And it was.
So where was this?
This one actually was in a room or a chamber in the Catholic cathedral up in Salt Lake City, the Cathedral of the Madeleine.
And you were how old?
In this one, I think I was 5 years old. We were young, and part of the training was we came with someone we trusted, and handler training, but we came with someone we trusted, and then the twist was that our daddies were taken out of the room, and the fathers were acting like they didn't want to go. The action of, no, we don't want to leave our daughters, and so we're automatically getting this anxiety building up, like what are they doing? And the words were told to us that we needed to obey so that they wouldn't hurt our dads, so that setup was already there. We were lined up to be actually quite silent, and we were being trained, or not trained, but we were being instructed to be part of another ceremony. And so there were other men, our fathers were taken away, and there were other men that came in robes, and we couldn't see who they were, and they would stand next to us. And in this ceremony of what was being, of the chanting and things like that, there was, of every child, of every girl that was there, and the man that was standing next to him in these robes, there ended up being a rape. And then as I was in that, and really in that recall, I recognized that the man that was raping me was my dad. But with the robes and the faces covered, that's not what we were, that's not what I was taking in. I was thinking that it was somebody else, and we were doing this thing. Depended on the ceremony, as I recall, a lot of times the leader was the one that was in a red robe, and the other members would be in black robes. But again, it depended on the ceremony and what was the purpose of it. If there was going to be a sacrifice later.
So hold on.
Okay. Right.
I'm sorry, because that time, so you were raped in public, basically. So, I mean, I'm sorry, to want to
No, you're
go
fine.
into these
Fine.
details, but I'm just trying to picture it because I haven't lived through anything like that. So,
Mhm.
were the girls then undressed, and was it in around an altar, or how was it even?
There, both. It depended on the ceremony. For me, this happened, I guess, often enough that yes, we could go in. Sometimes we were covered in like a shift, just
I see.
something. Yeah, so we would be naked underneath, and always ended up being naked. And I don't really remember a time there wasn't a rape or a violation. That was always part of it.
And so I'm just having a hard time picturing the group of men
Mhm.
in the church
Mhm. This would
all
be
raping their daughters
yes, exactly, together.
together.
It was at the same time. So part of what the ceremony and the chanting and the words would be, that the men were actually participating in, and the girls were witnessing and hearing and being a part of, was something that was foreign, because we weren't like chanting and participating in that way. It was happening as we were watching these men praising the leader or Lucifer or.
But was that leader then also with their daughter?
No, the leader would be
Okay.
the one that was actually leading the group. And in
Leading.
this training, it was the men and their daughters. And then after the rape, because they were still in their robes, they would leave, and then our dads would come back in a whole different demeanor, like to rescue us from being in there and just having been raped and naked. And now somebody, again, familiar, is coming back in a different persona. So the connection to being rescued is now being assigned to.
Right. So this ritual that you're describing, I'm just trying to. Okay, so obviously people have a hard time believing
Oh, sure.
that there will be a ritual, that there will be people that are gonna pretend to bring their daughters and then go away and then have this whole show put on for the daughters, and then come back in robes, let's say black robes, hiding them. But it's always black robes or red robes or other color robes, but it's always robes that really hide their whole body and face. And then there's the ritualistic aspect of it, of the chanting. Do you know what they believe, why they're doing it?
It's always an inversion of what the religion is teaching. Yes, I do know what was told to me, and that was that there was no power with Jesus Christ, that if you kneel before Jesus Christ, it's because of the burden of following him, that the that burden is lightened not by Jesus Christ but by Lucifer. I've seen multiple scenarios where there would be a Jesus figure and a Lucifer figure, and the Lucifer figure was either rescuing us, like saving us from the torture, or actually killing the Jesus figure, whether it was in an act, like playing, like a play, or in truth, killing an individual in front of us. So
Oh
both
my
of that
God.
did happen.
Yeah, so you were explaining how they think, really, how the perpetrators think, that are actually satanic, and you're explaining the inversion, but then you were also explaining the lengths somehow to which they go,
Yeah.
and you were speaking of human sacrifice.
That, unfortunately, was more common than not. And they would use those opportunities and layers. They would use those ceremonies not only for their purposes, but also, and their intentions, also to continue the programming and the training.
Right.
And the isolation. When you feel isolated from yourself because you're split so many ways, and you're isolated from your family because you don't trust and you want to, when you're isolated from your community, whether you're not believed or whether you just don't even have that available, and isolated from your God.
Right. Spirit, from spirit itself.
From spirit, from your own spirit, you're trusting yourself. And from the God that you're taught
Right.
is the one that will be there, that you're trying to please, or you're trying to, one day see after you die. This is the God you're going to see, and you better be good enough. And in different scenarios and in different ways, there was this one time I remember. There was this child. Talk about human sacrifice. There was this child that was going to be sacrificed, and there was a group of us, and I believe it was all girls.
Do you know where she came from, or the child came from?
A lot of times they have access to children that come from families that are actually offered up because of requirements. Sometimes it is from adoptions. Other times it comes from children that don't have birth certificates that can't be traced. And in this case, what was the most impressive to me, but it was that we were told to pray for the child, to save that child. To pray that, they said, pray to your God. Pray to your God to save this baby. Pray to your God to save you. Where is your God? If he shows up, if he cares,
Oh my goodness.
he'll come. And then he doesn't show up. And then they can proceed with the ceremony, and you witness it, and you witness
Your failure.
it's the failure is so clear, and the consequences are so mind-blowing.
So then you cannot possibly believe. Oh,
And yet you invest. Yeah, look at this. You take in how horrible you are. And you carry it over into your life that you're never good enough. You carry it over that even your best efforts, even your most sincere prayer is not heard. And
that's the indoctrination in the religious sense. I'm so
Right.
I want to say I'm so incredibly sorry. I know what it feels like to be made to feel like you're bad.
I felt horrible. And then they tell you that.
But not to this degree, because even though a lot of these perpetrators were Catholic,
Ugh.
they just didn't really. It wasn't like this.
This is very, very pointed. It's very, very methodically focused. It's potent.
Yeah. It's the reversal. The reversal.
So God,
Antichrist.
Jesus doesn't show up. Child dies. The ceremony continues. And then And then we're also told that it's our fault.
Yes. Yeah.
So not only did God not show up, it's our fault. And that theme, I'm not, that theme of it being my fault, that thing about doing everything to an exactness again, right? It's carried over so many different ways. There's the creativity and the different avenues and aspects that are used just to create even more splits in an altar, you know, or in myself, but just even in, you know, like deepened of how I couldn't trust myself and how I had to give over that power to them, to the authority, to somebody else that knew better than me.
To the leadership. The leadership for you to become one of them.
Exactly. And on a daily basis to my father, because he was the leadership. The way the church is set up, the father of the home is the leader of the home, and those kinds of titles are the, you know, to be honored. And I automatically just gave it over. I even remember consciously in high school thinking if I didn't know something, then clearly somebody else knows better than me and they're the authority on it. So my searching or my opinion or my lack of firm knowledge in anything just automatically put me not in a place of learning, but in a place of subordination.
Sure. Well, what's interesting is that you say that, and that's obviously true. And the indoctrination is just, I'm just getting a sense of it now, of the degree of indoctrination where that all gets reversed, where you're not allowed to have faith. You can't receive help.
No. That indoctrination would also be directed where me personally would be being hurt and tortured by somebody dressed up like Jesus.
Oh, God.
And the person that would save me would be somebody that claimed the name of Lucifer.
Oh, goodness.
And so my trust and my bonding in that time and that part was not with Jesus, not with God.
Of course.
There was a subconscious bonding that went a whole different direction for relief.
You already described the ritual where the ritual with the fathers, that was really in order to make you feel that your savior is your torturer. So you have now Lucifer coming in to save you.
Often.
Oh my goodness.
Demonstrations of the power play in the religion, because the religion is the framework. It is the framework that so much of this is happening in. So then it gets reinforced automatically in church or just in social dialogue, even subconsciously.
Wow.
But the play between Lucifer and Jesus Christ is so common. And the one that always wins is Lucifer, the one that's always the rescuer, the one that has the more power. It's never Jesus. And yet inside, there was a knowing that was wrong.
That's where I want to go. Because you and I are sitting here today, and there's a reason for that.
Yeah. There was definitely a very, very, very spiritual aspect that came through a number of times from within me, but then also experiences where I did see Jesus. But within me, I had the tendency to be combative in some of these ceremonies. And
Combative.
Combative,
You just
and-
explain that a little bit.
Well, I'm thinking of one particularly when I was 12 years old, and they had a number of us girls. I was dressed, I was in a line, and I was dressed, we were dressed in something sheer. But in this room, it felt very like much like a dungeon, and there was an altar, and there was a man on the altar, and it was some kind of ceremony. I think he was moving up in the ranks or something. It was one of their own ceremony. All I know is I was walking in, and I was about third or fourth behind. One gal had a pillow for his head. Everything was like symbolic, and I held onto the tray, and on the tray were surgical implements, and I believe there had something to do with circumcision. I don't know because I didn't get that far. I stepped over the threshold, recognized the room, and there's a part of me that's going, I am not participating. I want none of this. And so I believe I took a few steps and I just dropped the tray. Like that was my
Ultimate rebellion.
expression of no. And when I talk rebellion, I mean, honestly, when you interrupt a ceremony,
Yeah, I know.
that one was not good. No, the man that was the leader in that one, it was like, and I know he was a Catholic priest. I do know that. I know that much about him in that situation. And there was a room, it was a room full of people. And
how many people were
I would say 24.
24 people.
Yeah, and that was a pretty full room, and a lot of them were gathered around this man on this it was a stone table, dimly lit, and because of the instruments on this tray, I
Something
mean,
was happening.
I could even describe the instruments like it was unusual to me, but anyway, I dropped the tray, and he looked over, and he didn't look, I mean, he looked at me, the man that was the priest looked at me, but he was kind of in that direction, and he looked at the women that were kind of like, you know, like like our attendants, like they were making sure that we were like going to be coming in formally and, you know, going forward. And he just looked at them and said, take care of it. And so these two men grabbed me and pulled me out. Like, so I'm, you know, kind of going backwards, and they took me to another room, and that's where I was really verbally, it was really rough, because it's like you kind of know what you did, and like, oh, I messed up, but then it's like, but I didn't mess up because I'm not going to do that. And in this circumstance, more of that defiance came through, and the woman that came with me into the room, she was just like, you're gonna obey, you know, you're not out of this. And I just remember being in a space enough where I'm like, I won't do it. That was kind of the phrasing I caught on to, because there is like still a bit of a drugging that I was in, right? But I remember catching onto that phrase, like, I won't do it. And she said, you will. And this is thick in your family. Your grandmother's a part of it. Your grandfather's a part of it. Your dad's in it. Your mom helps. And I said, I won't. And she said, you will. And instead of attending the ceremony, I got tortured. And it was interesting. Horrible, but interesting, because in this case of the torture, it was like I was put into stocks. I mean, they had stocks,
What's
you know,
where
or, you know, like, you know, anyway, that those
like
wooden
those
stocks, like
humiliating things from the
right,
Middle Ages.
Middle Ages, yeah.
Yeah. They put your head and your hands through,
So that I could be whipped, but then, of all things, she kept throwing cold water onto me, and they had fans in there, and it was so cold. And again, it's this use of temperature that
freezing water
so
and then cold fans. Yeah.
And they,
In a dungeon.
I was told how it was my fault. I was told, and then the berating, and the you're not worth anything, and your vomit, and you're a whore. Like, this is where they would use these words that was connected to all these other trainings and all these other things that were happening. We talked about sex training, and oh yeah, you know, not good enough here.
Well,
yeah, oh my goodness, like, that one was hard, because here I am from the inside, not pre-thinking, hey, I'm gonna like mess this up. I'm going to throw a wrench in the works.
The defiance was there. It's sort of like the red thread to your soul is this defiance. And how interesting that when I defied my owner,
Yeah.
I ended up in a dungeon as well. And I was in irons for days.
For days.
And I was also tortured, but I was also yelled at, mostly verbally. But it was reinforced with having a bucket of, for in my case, blood
Right.
with
Right.
remains. And then yelled at that it was because I was so evil.
Right.
And then being left
In that state.
in that state for, I don't know, very, very long time. So at first I didn't, the verbal abuse didn't really reach me, and I didn't believe it because I knew better. I knew that I knew it wasn't true. But then I started to believe it because I was left there in that state. And this reprogrammation, because of my defiance,
Right.
became almost in my adult life just as important in my, lack of, my insecurities. So
Sure.
first there's the insecurities underlying the persona, which are huge, but then there was, I presented a lot more as insecure in my adult life because of the reprogramming that I went through. So, all right, you give this example, this extremely, I just want to thank you for that girl that still had the courage to defy, that would not obey. So you say you had the spirit, you said you were told this is spirit, and you were made to feel this thing in your spine, which is just incredible to me how accurate they are. It's in your spine.
Yeah.
Now, and then that was all used for programming. And yet, in spite of your whole body, and it's mind control, so it goes to the mind.
Yep.
You're supposed to be completely theirs and fit in. Still didn't work. So what was this? How did the spiritual then?
The spiritual, oh man, I would have, as I could recall, I would have those moments of myself that came through. The consequence on the end was not just the torture of the immediacy, but there was, it's almost like they had to like repress, they had to really beat that down. So then I know I went through phases of, ultimate obedience, super, like just the good girl, and
Because they didn't say, okay, now you're no good anymore. They just wanted to make sure that you were going to stay in line, and they were still considering you for leadership.
Still.
Yes.
Still. That
okay.
was still happening.
Important.
That was very much a part of that for even years.
So sometimes when you keep that original light self that comes through in these moments of disobedience or in these moments of defiance, that the leadership often, they want you even more. Because if they can get you to come to their side, it's worth more to them.
Absolutely. It's
So-
very potent.
So in my case, they immediately went to destroy completely, because my owner was so incredibly insecure. But in your case, it seems like they're like, okay, we're gonna get her, we're gonna break her.
That was definitely motive. We're gonna break her. The value apparently that I carried to them was enough that it was worth the effort, the retraining, the direction to my handlers, my father, my grandparents, like
Right.
really
Bloodline
bring that
plus your personality. So what happened?
So that again, like I was saying, I would go through periods where that extra training at home would happen, and just feeling so worthless, helpless, um, disconnected. I felt really alone at my house. I didn't feel like I was part of the family. So I would often feel so alone that this is where the ideation of killing myself would come through. And I would have it really strong. The strongest time that I actually had was saved was by the family dog, because I was thinking that nobody would miss me and the world was better off without me. I remember really, really sitting that and contemplating. And then the dog sat by me and I thought, oh, he would miss me. It was the one, the one thing that actually countered all of those false, that programming thoughts, is the purity of the family dog. But I would recognize, with even on the times of the hopelessness, helplessness, like the self-worth of being like, I just really wasn't worth anything, that would take me into a really huge downward spiral. And that was a hard one to get out of. In fact, I could almost feel it coming. I could feel my body like coming, and it was, I would say it would have been like a body memory where I was remembering how I would be yelled at and told that I was worth nothing, and just the despair associated with being and going through torture and rape and abuse in that way, and how I was told there was no way out. I was never going to be free of it. They always owned me. That has such a weight,
Sure.
and
So how could you possibly free yourself then? What happened?
honestly, I remember I was 37, and I was going through a really weird time. I want to say that I was expressing symptoms, or I was just feeling, I was depressed. So, the depression. But the dissociation is what I look at it now as, is like I was out of body more often than present, that it was confusing to me, because I knew myself, or my persona, to be very, personable and happy, and this was not.
But you were at that time not leadership, right?
I was not leadership
You were.
yet.
Oh,
So
you were still
I was
access.
still being accessed.
Wow.
And I remember where I did step away and start to heal, really start to heal, was because of this depression and my confusion over myself.
Oh.
And I was going crazy, I guess, the way I just felt like I was just, I didn't know myself. And I didn't have the language to know that I was actually kind of in this consistent split. And I know that there had been some triggerings and some things that I was following through with, some programming. And anyway, I was feeling all of the dissonance inside of me. And I wanted to talk to the person I trusted most, and that was my dad.
Uh-huh.
I was trying to figure out how to tell him all the things I'd done wrong and all the craziness that I was going through. And I wanted an answer because he was the most wise person I knew, and the person I trusted most. And I had been building up to this for a few weeks. And I also had been talking to a fairly trusted friend who had suggested a therapist that I could see, and I was just not going to go see a therapist. That terrified me more than anything because I had programming around that, right? And I got to a point where I made a phone call to my dad. Actually, what I was going to do is I had come to my end, and I had picked up the phone to call the therapist, and I had the phone number right in front of me. And it's funny, it was not through cell phones. It was, when you had you could actually like punch the numbers in the phone, like you had the little wall phone. And instead of calling the number for the therapist, I called my dad.
Yeah.
And he answered the phone, but he wasn't in town. They were going on a cruise. So he had like 10 days. There was this gap before he would even be back. But I was like, can we go to lunch? I need to talk to you. And he said, no, yeah, when I get back, we're just getting on this cruise ship. And this is the reason I'm bringing this up, is this is where that inner like light, I think it was divinely orchestrated, because I was on the path of the programming of who I trusted and what I was trained to trust. And when he couldn't show up, that's when I was just like, I just hung up and then called the number of the therapist. And I wanted to stick to that, because there's so much shame around therapy. Like there was just so much shame around it. I was like, okay, I don't even need to share this with my dad. Like I can just kind of keep this to myself. And anyway, that is where I believe divine intervention, my own inner light, like the whole thing was like, you want to heal. You want to bring this out of you. You want to know the truth. And I did. I was trying to figure out, what is at the root of all of this? That was my phrasing. And I found it.
Okay.
And that experience, those experiences of being brave enough to step into therapy, and then going through the process of having memories come forward and have them be so astoundingly awful. And not really knowing, just initially thinking it was symbolic, like, oh, there's symbolism here, like I'll understand it later, until I started recognizing my family in it, and the way it was, and then it didn't let up, and things started making sense, and then my body started to feel better, and my spirit started to come in stronger. And as hard as it was, and as devastating, over and over and over, as devastating as pulling up and recalling some of these experiences was, because boy, I had no outside validation, right? I had to totally trust myself, which was also very challenging.
Of course.
And trust the process.
All the validation comes from within.
That's exactly right.
This is for me
Recognize that validation, things were making sense, and sense inside. It wasn't like, oh, this makes a lot of sense. Here.
And then, but you get better.
That's the thing. I could not deny the fact that I was getting better. My emotions were like de-escalating. My anxiety was going away. My rage, suddenly, like, I don't want to say suddenly, but it dissipated and disappeared and didn't come back ever. And
I say that fantasy does not lead to greater integration.
No.
If you create stories, if it's not real, you do not get better. You get worse. So yeah.
It has been so much work, but it has been, I know myself. I know the truth of who I am in a better way than, or a very more genuine way than what was programmed into me to be. I know God. I know Jesus. I know
Yeah, I
light.
wanted to ask you about
Yeah.
Jesus, since this whole satanic indoctrination is all so specifically going against Christ. So what is your relationship then
There were
today?
times today is so solid. Like,
Oh, yeah.
there's no question. Yeah,
Okay.
today is, yeah. I don't wonder at all about
The power.
him, the power, even I can't, the awareness of all of it. There are things about this that I trust so implicitly, that I just, the questions that were always, the doubts that were always fostered and really played upon and programmed in don't have any, there's just no, they don't, they also dissipated those doubts about Jesus, about God.
How did that evolve? Can you talk just a tiny little
Sure,
bit
a tiny
about
bit
that?
about that. It was specifically began when I had memories, when I recognized that in some of these ceremonies, in some of these circumstances, even, well, that Jesus was there, that he was there, he showed up, he was present, and I could see him. And there was no doubt. I didn't have to wonder. Like, there is just a knowing. And when those times would happen where I would see him and where I knew it, the clarity of what was not him, the clarity of him, it was so clear. It was so clear that it's like all of that horrific setup, and there's so much going on. It really it just kind of lost its power. I don't know another way to say it. It didn't eliminate that things were going on, and it didn't eliminate that I still had pain in my body, or that, it didn't, but what I knew and what I saw was so much greater. And I had multiple experiences like that. It wasn't just one time. I had experiences where I was out of my body. And a couple of them were intentional, like where I was intentionally killed.
In near-death experiences created by the perpetrators for you to split in that way.
Correct.
In my case, often just to be more psychic, to become more psychic
And
intuitive.
exactly. And being out of having those near-death experiences and having him show up and even having interaction, and my own recollection of, oh, this isn't done yet. I'm not finished with my mission. I'm not finished with this. I even remember one time.
So right, you had.
He said, yeah, I was like, I'm not done yet, am I? And he's like, no. And he said, but I will be with you. And there was no doubt. But there was also no doubt that I wasn't going to be rescued from pain or rescued from torture or rescued from any of it. But I understood at a very deep soul level what he meant. And I can look at some of those rebellions, dropping a tray, speaking up, saying whatever, and knowing that that connection of that truth of me was present. It was never stolen or buried fully.
Can't be stolen, yeah.
Exactly. Even though they have plenty of things where they're like, you're us, you're one of us, and I'm like, evidence in front of me that, says and speaks to what they're saying, and yet the truth inside of me going, no.
And so what is your mission?
Oh, my mission. My mission really is to speak about what happened to me, speak about this truth, to show people that at the end of all of this, I really am a treasure. I have been so worth all of this work, and then to live life in a way that demonstrates the resilience, the value of a human life, that we can all give ourselves that gift, right, of knowing ourselves in a way that is not isolated and is not split off, that it is in line and in truth, and trusting that.
Yes.
Telling my story, supporting others in their journeys as they're doing that.
Specifically for the Mormon Church, as a leader in the Mormon Church.
Specifically, yeah, there's a lot of training with that.
No, I mean,
No,
not a leader for the church, but a leader for other Mormons that might
Absolutely.
be trying to find deeper truths
Right.
and, understand, what is happening in the church, and maybe finding you
Yes.
as to what that dark truth. But then you're not only showing the dark truth, you're also showing the way to the light, to the real light.
I hope that that's what people see. I hope that
Isn't that your mission?
That's my mission. Yeah, it is. I want that to inspire them. Like, every one of us are doing this on our own. I can't do it for anyone, just like you can't for anyone else. We all are in this, our own effort, our own power, our own light.
But there's a lot of power in that mission, and it's very beautiful.
Yeah, thank you.
And your life is very beautiful. Just want to acknowledge, before we close, that you are a silversmith. You make beautiful jewelry. You have a beautiful life here. It's really wonderful to be in your home and to meet your friends. It's a beautiful life, a very accomplished life. And so, you're definitely a beacon,
Thank you.
showing that anything can be overcome and without bypassing. And yet, can't bypass, but there's so much hope, and that hope comes from you.
Yeah, thank you. I want that to be the message that how the people receive from this.
That's what I feel.
Me. Thank you. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Thank you for opening your heart and soul.
Thank you. Oh my goodness, thank you. Anneke, it's been lovely to be with you. Oh my goodness.